So hi and welcome back. I continue with the radio buttons and the checkboxes. So now we move on to another topic, which is the value attribute. And this is important because in a real life scenario, this is just playing around with the HTML elements, but in a real application, if the user chooses one of these options, you need to know what the user chose, and you need to process that data in some way. And most likely you will send the data to a backend where the data is processed and eventually saved into a database and stuff like that. So you need to track the value basically, and the way we do that is by specifying a value on the element. So for instance, this input right here, the radio, it should have, one of them should have the value attribute of indoor. So I'll just copy this indoor and I will add the value attribute at the end of this. So I'll just add space value equals, and I will paste it, so indoor, like that. And one of the radio buttons should have the outdoor value. So I'll do the same here, outdoor. And as for the checkboxes, one of them should have loving. So I'll add it like this, loving. And one of them should have lazy. So I will add that too, same way, lazy. And one of them should have energetic. So I will add it at the end. You can add it anywhere. It's like you can add it before the required or after it. I'll add it before it. So value energetic, like this. And if I run it, it will probably pass. So before we move on, I just want to point out the actual significance of this attribute. So it has nothing to do with the actual graphical part of it or anything that you see. It's nothing that you see. It's just a value, a hidden value, you can say, which is sent to the server when you actually submit the form, if the form is connected to a real server, basically. So for now, I'll just run this. It doesn't work, and I think the reason is because I added the value attribute to the wrong input. So it should be here, of course, like this, because this input is a type of text, so it's actually this one, whereas the actual checkbox is this one. And this code is quite unclear. It's much more simpler when you have it like this. Basically, you have spaces and you nest things. It's much easier to read. But for now, yeah, let's just move on. So this works. And now we want to, most likely in some scenarios, you want things to be checked by default. So you want to do the job for the user, basically, because you know that in most cases, maybe one option would be chosen by most users. So you don't want to force the user to press the button, but you can just press it for the user, if that makes sense. And that's quite simple. You just add a checked, the word checked inside of an input element, if it's a radio button or if it's a checkbox. So I'll just add my first radio button should be checked by default. So I'll just add checked to my first radio button, which is the indoor. So here I'll just say checked, and just notice what happened. It just checked it by default. So and the second test is that the first checkbox should also be checked by default. So I'll just find the first one, it's this one, and I'll just add the word checked at the end of it, like this, checked. And we see that it checks it by default. So now if I run it, it works. And now we want to use the div element. So what is a div element? It's known as a division element, which is a general purpose container. A div element, as they say, is probably the most commonly used HTML element. Why? Because it's so simple and you can use it for anything. So you can just add a div element, and if you do, it doesn't do anything actually, which is quite ironic. Even though it's the most used element, it doesn't do anything. So, and maybe that's the power of it. So since it's just an empty thing, maybe you saw something. If I just cut it out, you see something happen. Yeah, you see nothing happens actually. So, and that's because it doesn't contain anything. So it's a container. You can add anything you want inside of it, and and you can also, which we will cover later on. I will talk about the CSS, the style sheet language, which you can use to style elements, and you can style a div any way you want. So for now, let me just finish off the tests. So I added a div element with a closing tag, so this last test should run. So the P elements should be nested inside of it. So I'll just take the closing tag, and I will close it here like this. I think this is all I had to do, and I'll just indent it like this, and I'll remove the spaces. So now we see that the div is a wrapper or a container for all these elements, and these elements are nested inside of this div container. So if I run the tests, we pass the tests. And now I'm not sure, I think this is maybe one of the, it's almost the last one in HTML. So we want to declare a doc type. So what is the doc type? The doc type is basically a way to say to the browser that, hey, look, this document is the type of HTML. And the way you add a doc type is by, you just add an angle bracket and then the exclamation mark and then doc type HTML like this. And it's the first line basically. So this tells the browser that it's the version of HTML5. And you know that HTML5, even though it's the standard in the browsers today, it wasn't the standard for some years ago. So you have to specify this because some really old pages might not even use HTML5. And then you have to add the HTML tags. So it's basically HTML, opening and closing, and all your HTML code has to be written inside of it, like that. So now, all I want to do is, I added the doc type, I have an HTML, and I should add an H1 element. So it's basically a header, so I'll add like this, hi, or hello world. If I run this, it works. And the final thing with HTML is defining the head and the body. So now that you know about the elements, you know about the basic elements, and HTML5 in its essence is quite straightforward. It's about 10 or 11 elements, I think, which are the most commonly used, and the other elements are rarely used. So you have a quite important organization in the HTML document, which is the head and the body. So what is the head? I like to think of it as a human body. So you have your head, which is your brain, basically, I would say. So all your information is in your brain. So it's nothing that anyone outside can see. And that's the way I like to think of the head element. Basically that it's information about the document, which no one can really see. It's basically for the browser to know. So I will wrap this inside of I will wrap the title, because the title is now rendered inside of the window, even though you can see it at the top of this is the title. So it's shown at the top, but it's not a part of the actual web page. And inside of the head, you can use link elements, which is basically metadata, which is data about the element or about the document, excuse me, or references to the document. If you, for instance, want to add CSS, so you would probably want to point to a CSS style sheet, an external file, basically, which the document will read from. So that's what the head is about. The body is the complete opposite. So it's everything that is shown on the actual page, the web page, is inside of the body. So the body is everything that you see. And that's why I like the word body, because it's basically the external things, the things that you see. So now I will just wrap the H1 and the P inside of a body element, and I will open it, and don't forget to close it. So both the head and the body elements are opening and closing, and I think this should do it. So I'll just check the test. So it should only be one head element, which is correct. It should only have one body, which is correct, and the head should be the child of the HTML element, which it is. So it's the child of the HTML element, and the body is also a child of the HTML. So they are linked together basically. And the head should wrap around the title element, it does, and the body should wrap around the H1 and the P elements, it does. So if I run this, it works. So now basically it's 100% complete. We finished the basic HTML and HTML5 section, and now we will move on to CSS, which is basically styling web pages. So CSS is what is known as cascading style sheets, and it's the way you style a page, because a page without CSS would be really plain and boring and not appealing at all. So in the upcoming videos, I will go through basic CSS and the challenges in FreeCodeCamp, and it's a really fun topic. CSS is one of the most interesting topics to me in web development, because you can do so much things with it. So that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.